The desert held its breath as dusk settled over the New Mexico territory. Victoria Hartwell stood on the balcony of her guardian's Santa Fe mansion, watching the mountains blush purple against the fading light. Her white lace gloves gripped the iron railing as she inhaled the scent of pinyon and sage carried on the evening breeze. "Miss Hartwell," called a maid from inside, "Governor Brennan and his son will arrive within the hour. Mrs. Montgomery insists you finish your preparations." Victoria nodded without turning. "A moment more, Lucy, please." When the door closed, she closed her eyes and allowed herself one final rebellion before the evening's performance began. 10 years in the Montgomery household had taught her the value of stolen solitude. At 23, she had grown into the role expected of her. The orphaned ward transformed into a proper lady, destined for an advantageous marriage to Thomas Brennan, the governor's ambitious son. The weight of the sapphire engagement ring felt heavy on her finger. 6 weeks until the wedding that would cement political alliances and bring her the security her guardians assured her was paramount for a woman with no family and no fortune of her own. She opened her eyes and caught movement at the edge of the garden wall, a shadow, too deliberate to be the wind. Victoria leaned forward, straining to see in the gathering darkness. A figure emerged briefly into a patch of fading light, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a curious blend of white man's clothing and traditional Apache garments. Their eyes met across the distance, and Victoria's heart stuttered in her chest. It couldn't be. The man raised his hand in a gesture she had not seen since childhood, then disappeared into the shadows. Victoria clutched the railing to steady herself. 10 years had passed since the raid that claimed her parents' lives on the journey to Santa Fe. 10 years since a young Apache warrior had found her hiding beneath an overturned wagon, and, instead of taking her scalp, had led her to safety. "Miss Victoria," Lucy's voice came more insistently this time, "Mrs. Montgomery is most distressed by your delay." Victoria turned, her face composed by years of practice, though her pulse raced wildly. "I'm coming now." The dining room glittered with crystal and silver. Governor Brennan, a barrel-chested man with a voice that filled rooms without effort, dominated the conversation from the head of the table. His son Thomas sat beside Victoria, occasionally brushing his fingers against her hand in a proprietary gesture that once gave her comfort, but now made her skin prickle with unease. "The Apache problem must be dealt with decisively," the governor was saying. "The recent raids on settlements near Fort Craig cannot go unanswered." Victoria's guardian, Judge Montgomery, nodded solemnly. "What do your sources tell you about the band responsible?" "Colonel Fitzgerald believes it's Shadow Eagle's people." Victoria's teacup froze halfway to her lips. "Shadow Eagle?" her guardian's wife inquired. "I don't recall that name among the troublemakers." "A young war chief," the governor explained. "Educated at the Eastern schools, if you can believe it. Speaks better English than most of my officers. Makes him all the more dangerous. He understands our ways but rejects them." Thomas leaned forward. "Father has authorized a special detachment to bring him in, dead or alive." "Is there evidence these particular Apache were responsible for the raids?" Victoria asked, her voice carefully modulated. All eyes turned to her with surprise. Women rarely contributed to political discussions at the Montgomery table. Thomas patted her hand condescendingly. "My dear, the evidence is quite clear. Several survivors identified Shadow Eagle's distinctive war paint. But if he was educated in the East, Victoria," Mrs. Montgomery interrupted sharply, "perhaps you might inquire if anyone would care for more wine." Victoria lowered her eyes. "Of course, forgive me." Later, as the men retired to the study for brandy and the women to the parlor for tea, Victoria slipped away to the garden. The night air cooled her flushed cheeks as she moved swiftly along the stone path, away from the house lights. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered into the darkness, sensing rather than seeing the presence that had followed her. "They're hunting you." A figure emerged from behind an ancient cottonwood tree. In the moonlight she could see him clearly now. The boy she remembered transformed into a formidable man. His black hair was tied back, his sharp-planed face bearing the subtle markings of his people, alongside a scar that hadn't been there before. His eyes remained unchanged, dark and penetrating, seeing through pretenses. Victoria. Her name in his mouth sounded different, not the polished Miss Hartwell of Santa Fe society, but something true. "You remember me. Shadow Eagle," she said, testing the name she'd heard at dinner. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "The white men call me that. My people call me Nahkohe, but you—" He stepped closer. "You once called me friend." The memory flooded back, days spent hiding in a cave while he brought her food and water, teaching her to move silently through the desert, keeping her safe until they reached a trading post where white travelers could take her to Santa Fe. "Why have you come?" she asked, though something in her already knew. "Do you know what they're saying about you? About the raids?" "That is why I am here. My people did not attack those settlements. The governor says there were witnesses who saw what they were meant to see." His voice remained calm, but tension radiated from his body. "Someone wants war between your people and mine, someone who would benefit from blood spilled on both sides." A sound from the house made Victoria turn anxiously. When she looked back, Nahkohe had retreated further into the shadows. "I need your help, Victoria. There is more at stake than you know." "I can't," she began, touching her engagement ring unconsciously. "I'm to be married to the governor's son." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps disappointment, but his face revealed nothing. "Then I wish you happiness," he said formally. "But before you bind yourself to that family, you should know the truth about what happened to your parents." Victoria's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "The attack that killed your mother and father was not what you were told." He reached into his vest and withdrew a small leather pouch. "This belonged to your father. I've kept it safe, waiting for the right time." As he pressed it into her palm, his fingers brushed hers. The contact sent an unexpected surge of warmth through her body. "Meet me tomorrow at sunset. The old mission ruins south of town." He began to back away. "Come alone, Victoria. Your parents deserve justice, and your people and mine deserve peace." Before she could respond, he vanished into the night, leaving her clutching the small pouch, her heart thundering with questions that threatened the carefully constructed foundation of her life. From the house came Thomas's voice, calling her name with growing impatience. Victoria quickly tucked the pouch into her bodice and composed herself. "Coming," she called, but her voice caught on the word as she realized that for the first time in 10 years, she had a choice to make that was truly her own. The morning brought clear skies and mounting anxiety. Victoria moved through her daily routines mechanically, breakfast with the Montgomerys, needlework in the parlor, a fitting for her wedding gown. The leather pouch remained hidden in her dresser drawer, untouched since the night before. She feared what truths it might contain. "You seem distracted today," observed Mrs. Montgomery, studying Victoria over her embroidery hoop. "Is it wedding nerves, my dear?" Victoria forced a smile. "Perhaps. There's so much to consider." "Indeed, though the hard decisions have been made for you, Judge Montgomery and I have ensured you'll want for nothing." The older woman's voice softened slightly. "After losing your parents so tragically, we've done our best to secure your future." Guilt twisted in Victoria's stomach. The Montgomerys had taken her in, educated her, introduced her to society. Their methods were strict, their affection conditional, but they had given her a home when she had nothing. "I'm grateful," Victoria said, meaning it despite her reservations. Mrs. Montgomery nodded, satisfied. "Thomas will make an excellent husband. The governor confided that his son may be appointed territorial secretary by year's end. You'll be at the center of society." Victoria thought of Thomas, handsome, ambitious, and utterly convinced of his own importance. He treated her with the same polite ownership one might show a prized horse. Not unkind, but never seeing beyond what she represented. A respectable wife who would grace his arm at political functions. The grandfather clock chimed 3. Only a few hours until sunset. "I believe I'll visit the mercantile," Victoria announced suddenly. "There's a particular ribbon I'd like for my trousseau." Mrs. Montgomery frowned. "Take Lucy with you." "I'd prefer some solitude to clear my thoughts. The crowds at Palmer's store always thin by late afternoon." She stood before her guardian could object. "I'll be back well before dinner." The journey to the abandoned mission took longer than anticipated. Victoria had borrowed the Montgomerys' phaeton, claiming a headache that required fresh air. As she guided the horse along the dusty road, her mind raced with doubts. She was risking everything on the word of a man she had known as a child, a man now hunted by the very family she was poised to join. The mission ruins appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the reddening sky. Built by Spanish missionaries a century earlier and abandoned during tribal uprisings, Only stone walls and the remnants of a bell tower remained. Victoria tethered the horse in a sheltered alcove and gathered her skirts to climb over fallen masonry. "I wasn't certain you would come." She startled at Nahkohe's voice. He stood in the shadows of what had once been the chapel, dressed more traditionally today in buckskin leggings and a loose cotton shirt, a rifle slung across his back. "Neither was I," she admitted, maintaining a cautious distance. He gestured to a flat stone where they could sit. "Did you open the pouch?" Victoria shook her head and withdrew it from her reticule. "I was afraid." "The truth is often frightening." He sat beside her, leaving space between them. "Your father was carrying documents when your wagon was attacked, documents that would have exposed corruption in the territorial government." With trembling fingers, Victoria opened the pouch. Inside was a folded packet of papers, the edges charred, and a small daguerreotype of her family, father, mother, and herself at about 12 years old. She traced their faces, memories flooding back of her father's booming laugh, her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair. "My father was a businessman," she said uncertainly. "We were traveling to Santa Fe for new opportunities after the war." He was more than that. William Hartwell was appointed by President Grant to investigate misappropriation of funds meant for peace initiatives with the native tribes. Nahkohe's voice grew softer. "The attack on your wagon train was no random raid. It was orchestrated to silence him." Victoria unfolded the papers, scanning the faded writing. Official letterhead from Washington. Lists of supplies and funds allocated for reservation improvements and peace treaties. Notes in her father's handwriting showing discrepancies, with names circled. Prominent citizens of the territory. One name leapt from the page, Brennan. "This can't be," she whispered. Governor Brennan wasn't even in office then. He was territorial secretary under Governor Mitchell, responsible for disbursement of federal funds. Nahkohe's eyes were somber. "Your father discovered that money meant for food, blankets, and tools for my people was being diverted. When tribal leaders protested the broken promises, the territorial militia was sent to maintain order. Blood was spilled. Raids were blamed on hostile Indians to justify further military action." Victoria's hands trembled. "And my parents? Hired guns, made to look like an Apache attack." His voice tightened with controlled anger. "I found you because I was tracking them. Too late to save your parents, but not too late for you. Why didn't you tell me this when you rescued me? You were a child, traumatized and afraid, and I was little more than a boy myself, the son of a chief who had sent me to white schools to learn the enemy's ways." Bitterness edged his words. "I returned you to your people because I believed you would be safe. I didn't realize until years later the full extent of the corruption, or that the same men who ordered your parents' deaths had taken you into their society." Victoria stared at the papers, her world tilting. "The Montgomerys were likely unaware. Judge Montgomery is known to be an honest man, if blind to the misdeeds of his associates." Nahkohe's expression softened slightly. "But your betrothal to Brennan's son is no coincidence. The governor keeps his potential threats close." The sun dipped lower, painting the desert in gold and shadow. Victoria felt numb with revelation. Why now, after all these years? "Because it's happening again. New treaties, new funds, new land seized from my people. When we protest, we are called raiders and murderers." He leaned closer, urgency in his voice. "The recent attacks near Fort Craig were not conducted by Apache. I have proof that miners seeking access to sacred lands in the mountains have staged these raids, wearing our dress, mimicking our ways. And Governor Brennan knows this? He orchestrates it, or at least benefits from it." Nahkohe stood, pacing with contained energy. "I need your help, Victoria. These papers alone are not enough. They're old, damaged. But with your testimony about what I've told you, and your position close to the Brennan family, we might prevent a war." Victoria rose shakily. "You're asking me to betray my guardians, my fiancé, everything I've built in the last 10 years. I'm asking you to honor your father's courage," he countered, "and to save innocent lives, both Apache and white settlers who will die if this deception continues." A sudden noise, horses approaching, interrupted them. Nahkohe tensed, reaching for his rifle. "Were you followed?" Fear clutched at Victoria's throat. "I don't think so, but—" "Go," he urged. guiding her toward a hidden path behind the ruins. "Take the documents. If they find you here with me, your usefulness to our cause is finished. What about you? I know these lands better than any tracker they could send." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "This isn't the first time I've disappeared when necessary." He hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek briefly. "Whatever you decide, Victoria, know that I have never forgotten the girl who faced death with courage, nor the woman she has become." The sound of men's voices grew closer. Without thinking, Victoria clutched his hand. "Tomorrow night. The old cottonwood by the river bend north of town." She spoke quickly. "I'll bring what information I can gather." Surprise and something warmer flashed in his eyes. He nodded once, then melted into the gathering dusk, silent as a shadow. Victoria hurried to her phaeton, heart pounding. As she drove away, she passed a group of riders heading toward the mission, ranch hands from a nearby property, not soldiers or lawmen as she had feared. Relief gave way to turmoil as she guided the horse back toward Santa Fe. The documents felt heavy in her pocket, weighted with implications that threatened everything she had believed about her life since the day her parents died. That night, as Thomas kissed her hand in parting after dinner at the Montgomery home, his signet ring caught the lamplight, the same crest she had seen on one of the documents, next to damning evidence of funds diverted from indigenous peoples to private mining interests. "Something troubles you," Thomas observed, studying her face with more perception than she had credited him with. Victoria manufactured a smile. "Wedding preparations. So many details." He squeezed her fingers possessively. "Leave the worrying to others, my dear. Your only concern should be looking beautiful on our wedding day." As the door closed behind him, Victoria felt the walls of her carefully constructed life beginning to crumble. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, removed the false bottom of her jewelry box, and hid the documents beneath her modest collection of keepsakes. Tomorrow she would have to choose between the security of the life planned for her and the truth of who she really was, the daughter of a man who had died seeking justice. Sunlight slanted through lace curtains as Victoria dressed the next morning, selecting a practical riding habit rather than her usual morning attire. She had barely slept, her mind churning with the revelations of the previous day. "You're riding out early, Miss Victoria?" Lucy asked as she helped secure her mistress's hair beneath a simple hat. "Just to clear my thoughts," Victoria replied. "The wedding plans are overwhelming." Lucy smiled sympathetically. "A fine match you've made. Half the ladies in Santa Fe envy you." Victoria studied her reflection in the mirror, the perfect portrait of a governor's future daughter-in-law. How easily she had learned to wear the mask. "Lucy," she began carefully, "did you ever hear stories about the attack that killed my parents?" The maid's hand stilled momentarily. "It's not my place to speak of such things, miss. Please. I have so few memories of that time." Lucy glanced toward the closed door, then spoke in a hushed tone. "There were whispers below stairs when you first came to the Montgomerys. Some said it was strange how the Indians attacked just one wagon in the party, yours, and how the valuable cargo was missing but not your father's money clip or your mother's jewelry." Victoria's pulse quickened. "What else?" "Just that Judge Montgomery worked hard to stop such talk. Said it disrespected the dead and frightened the living." Lucy fidgeted with a hairpin. "Is something wrong, Miss Victoria?" "No," she lied smoothly. "Just trying to make peace with the past before beginning my future." After breakfast, Victoria announced her intention to ride to the Brennan estate to discuss wedding arrangements with the governor's housekeeper. Judge Montgomery approved, suggesting she take the opportunity to strengthen her bond with her future family. Instead, Victoria directed her horse toward the territorial offices in the plaza. Thomas kept a private office there, where he handled much of his father's correspondence and political affairs. If there was evidence of ongoing corruption, of the staged raids Nahkohe had described, it might be found there. The clerk at the outer office greeted her with surprise. "Miss Hartwell, Mr. Brennan didn't mention you would be calling today." "A small surprise," Victoria replied with practiced charm. "I've brought some samples for the wedding invitations and hope to catch him between appointments." The clerk consulted a ledger. "He's meeting with Colonel Fitzgerald at Fort Marcy, not expected back until late afternoon." Victoria affected disappointment. "How vexing. I've ridden all this way." She glanced at Thomas's closed office door. "Might I leave the samples on his desk with a note?" I wouldn't want to interrupt his important work. The clerk hesitated, then nodded. Of course, miss, take your time. Once alone in Thomas's office, Victoria moved quickly. The desktop held nothing of interest. Territorial reports, correspondence about railroad investments, a half-written speech. She tried the drawers, finding them locked except for one containing stationery. A cabinet against the wall caught her attention. Partially concealed behind a map of the territory, its brass key gleamed in the lock. Victoria opened it cautiously, revealing stacks of documents and ledgers. She skimmed through them with growing horror. Receipts for weapons sold to mining companies at inflated prices, with the territorial militia listed as the official purchaser. Reports from a man named Fletcher about operations near Apache lands, mentioning payment for convincing demonstrations to justify military response. A letter from Governor Brennan authorizing the release of prisoners from the territorial jail for special assignments, with their sentences to be commuted upon completion. Most damning was a map, marked with Apache settlements, with red circles around those sitting on lands recently discovered to contain silver deposits. Notes in Thomas's handwriting detailed a strategy for removal following regrettable incidents that would necessitate military intervention. Victoria's hands shook as she quickly copied the most incriminating details into a small notebook she carried. She couldn't take the documents without their absence being noticed, but the evidence was clear. Nahkohe had told the truth. The Brennans were orchestrating attacks on settlers to justify seizing Apache lands for mining interests. A sound in the outer office startled her. Victoria quickly closed the cabinet, checked that everything appeared undisturbed, and was scribbling a note about wedding invitations when the door opened. Victoria. Thomas's voice carried surprise and something darker. This is unexpected. She turned, forcing brightness into her expression. Thomas, I thought to surprise you with some wedding samples, but you were out. He crossed to the desk, eyes scanning its surface as if checking for disturbances. How considerate. Though I wonder why you didn't send word ahead. Spontaneity, she replied lightly, though it seems I've had a wasted journey. Thomas moved closer, taking her hands in his. His touch felt different now, threatening rather than merely possessive. Nothing with you is wasted, my dear. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Though I'm curious what brings my fiancé to the dusty world of territorial politics, rather than to the house to consult with our housekeeper, as you told Judge Montgomery. Ice slid down Victoria's spine. He had already spoken with her guardian. I thought to accomplish both errands, she improvised. The government offices were on my way. Thomas studied her face, then seemed to accept her explanation. Let me escort you to the house then. Father will be pleased to see you. Victoria had no choice but to accompany him. As they rode, Thomas spoke of wedding plans and his father's political ambitions with the same calculating precision she had always found competent, but now recognized as coldly manipulative. At the Brennan estate, Governor Brennan received her warmly, though she noticed how his eyes assessed her, as if measuring a potential threat. Victoria, my dear, Thomas tells me you've been full of surprises today. She maintained her composure. Just eager to finalize our wedding plans, Governor. Commendable enthusiasm. He gestured for her to sit. You know, I was reminiscing just yesterday about your father. A shame we never had the opportunity to work together directly. Victoria's mouth went dry. You knew my father. By reputation only. A man of principle, they said. The governor's smile didn't waver. I'm certain he would be proud to see his daughter make such an advantageous match. The conversation continued with superficial pleasantries, but Victoria felt the undercurrent of suspicion. When she finally took her leave, Thomas insisted on escorting her back to the Montgomery home. We've heard disturbing reports, he said as they rode. The Apache renegade Shadow Eagle has been spotted near Santa Fe. Colonel Fitzgerald believes he may be planning something drastic before we can capture him. Victoria kept her expression neutral. How alarming. Indeed. The servants gossip that someone matching his description was seen near your guardian's garden 2 nights ago. Thomas watched her closely. You would tell me, of course, if you observed anything unusual. Of course, she replied steadily, though I can't imagine why an Apache warrior would have any interest in the Montgomery household. Thomas's smile was thin. One never knows what might draw a savage back to civilization. Perhaps unfinished business. As they reached the Montgomery home, Thomas took her hand before she could dismount. Victoria, you understand that as my wife, your loyalties must be absolute. The work my father and I do for this territory requires discretion and unity within our family. She met his gaze without flinching. I understand duty, Thomas. Good. He helped her down from her horse. Then you'll inform me immediately if you see or hear anything regarding Shadow Eagle. For your own protection, naturally. Victoria felt his eyes on her back as she climbed the steps to the house. Inside, she leaned against the closed door, heart hammering. They suspected something, perhaps not her specific actions, but enough to watch her closely. The meeting with Nahkohe that night now carried even greater risk, yet the evidence she had discovered made it imperative. Innocent people would die, were already dying, to satisfy the Brennans' greed. That evening, Victoria pleaded a headache and retired early. When the house grew quiet, she changed into dark clothing, secured her copied notes and her father's damaged documents, and slipped out through the servants' entrance. The night air held a chill as she made her way through back streets and gardens to reach the northern edge of town. The cottonwood tree stood ancient and massive against the starlit sky, its branches swaying gently in the breeze coming off the river. Victoria approached cautiously, alert for any sign of being followed. "Nahkohe," she whispered into the darkness. A shadow detached itself from the tree trunk. "Here." Relief flooded her, followed immediately by urgency. "They suspect something. Thomas questioned me today about sightings of you near the Montgomery house." Nahkohe's expression tightened. "We must move quickly then. What did you discover?" Victoria shared everything she had found in Thomas's office. The planned raids, the mining interests, the strategy to provoke military action against Apache settlements. Nahkohe listened in grim silence, occasionally asking for clarification. "This confirms what we suspected," he said when she finished. "But it won't be enough. Papers can be destroyed, witnesses silenced. What more can we do? There's a meeting tomorrow night. Fletcher and his men will receive payment for the next staged raid." Nahkohe's voice was taut with controlled anger. "If we can catch them in the act, with witnesses beyond just you and me." "Where?" "The old Sanchez warehouse at the edge of town. Governor Brennan won't be there, he's too careful, but Thomas will be overseeing the operation." Victoria felt sick. The man she was to marry in weeks was orchestrating murder for profit and political gain. "I have influential friends," she said slowly. "Judge Harrington of the Federal Circuit Court is visiting Santa Fe. He was my father's friend and has no love for the Brennans. If he were to witness this exchange," Nahkohe considered this, "a federal judge would have the authority to act, especially with evidence of crimes against both settlers and Apache." "I can convince him to come," Victoria said with growing determination. "But we'll need more than just his word against the Brennans. My people have been documenting the true raiders. We have a witness, a miner who was recruited for the last attack, but couldn't go through with it when he realized women and children would be killed." Nahkohe stepped closer, his face grave in the moonlight. "Victoria, if you do this, there's no going back. The Brennans won't forgive betrayal. They murdered my parents," she said, her voice strengthening with resolve. "They're planning to murder your people. There's nothing to go back to." A twig snapped in the darkness behind them. Nahkohe moved with lightning speed, pushing Victoria behind the massive tree trunk and drawing his knife in one fluid motion. "Come out," he commanded softly, "or the next sound will be your last breath." "Please," came a tremulous voice. "Miss Victoria, it's me, Lucy." Victoria exhaled sharply. "Lucy? What are you doing here?" The maid stepped hesitantly into view, her shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders. "I saw you leave. I was worried. With all your questions about the past and now sneaking out." Her eyes widened as she registered Nahkohe's presence. "Sweet heaven, it's him, the Apache they're hunting." "Lucy, listen to me," Victoria began, but the maid was backing away. "I should call for help. Mr. Thomas said—" "Thomas Brennan is planning to murder innocent people," Victoria interrupted sharply, "the same way his father orchestrated the murder of my parents." Lucy froze. "What?" Victoria quickly explained what they had discovered, watching understanding dawn on her maid's face. "I always thought there was something not right about that attack," Lucy said slowly. "And the way Mr. Thomas watches you, not like a man in love, but like he's guarding something," Victoria finished. Lucy looked between them, indecision warring on her face. "What are you planning to do?" Victoria exchanged glances with Nahkohe. Something dangerous, something right. After a long moment, Lucy straightened her shoulders. Then you'll need help. The judge's manservant drinks with my brother at the Silver Dollar. I can get word to him without raising suspicions. Relief washed through Victoria. You'd do that. My father was Shoshone, Lucy said quietly. My mother was a laundress at Fort Laramie. I know what men like the Brennans think of people with mixed blood. She nodded to Nahkohe. I'll help, but Miss Victoria can't go back to the Montgomery house tonight. They're already asking questions. Nahkohe considered this. There's a widow who lives on the outskirts of town, Miranda Vasquez. Her husband was Mexican, killed by raiders last year. She knows the truth and has sheltered our people before. I know Mrs. Vasquez, Lucy confirmed. I can say you're visiting her if anyone asks. They quickly formed a plan. Lucy would return to the Montgomery house, secure Victoria's absence with a story about visiting the grieving widow, and get word to Judge Harrington. Victoria would shelter with Mrs. Vasquez, and they would all meet the following evening before the warehouse rendezvous. As Lucy departed, Victoria felt a curious mixture of fear and exhilaration. For 10 years she had lived a life prescribed by others. Now she was choosing her own path, however dangerous. You have courage, Nahkohe said softly, like your father. I never thought I did, she admitted. Until now. They moved through the darkness toward the widow's house, walking side by side. When Victoria stumbled on the uneven ground, Nahkohe's hand steadied her, warm and strong against her arm. The contact lingered, neither of them pulling away. Why did you really save me that day, she asked. A white child, daughter of your enemy? Nahkohe was silent for several steps. My mother was killed by soldiers when I was very young. When I found you hiding, crying silently as your mother had taught you to do, his voice roughened. I saw a child, not an enemy. I couldn't walk away. Victoria's throat tightened with emotion. Thank you. Not just for then, but for now. For the truth. They continued in silence, but something had shifted between them. A connection forged in shared purpose and growing trust. As the widow's small adobe house came into view, Victoria realized that for the first time since her parents' death, she felt truly seen. Not for what she represented or could become, but for who she was. Tomorrow would bring danger and irreversible choices. Tonight, walking beside a man labeled her enemy but who had twice saved her life, Victoria felt an unfamiliar sensation. Freedom. The widow Vasquez's small adobe home smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. The older woman, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held both warmth and wariness, welcomed Victoria without questions, after Nahkohe explained their situation. Rest, she told Victoria, showing her to a simple bedroom. Tomorrow will demand all your strength. Sleep came fitfully. Victoria dreamed of her father, his face both proud and sorrowful as he handed her his documents. She woke before dawn, disoriented until the events of the previous day rushed back. Mrs. Vasquez provided a simple breakfast and practical clothing to replace Victoria's fine riding habit, a worn but clean cotton skirt, a faded blouse, and a dark shawl that would attract less attention than her usual attire. You look like a different woman, the widow observed, perhaps closer to your true self. By mid-morning, Nahkohe had departed to make preparations with his people, promising to return by dusk. Victoria spent the day helping Mrs. Vasquez with household tasks, finding unexpected peace in the simple work of kneading bread and hanging laundry. How did you become involved in this? Victoria asked as they worked side by side. The widow's hands stilled momentarily. My husband Manuel was killed last year. The territorial newspaper reported it as an Apache raid on our small farm. Her voice remained steady, but grief edged her words. But Manuel had befriended the local Apache. They traded fairly, respected boundaries. When Shadow Eagle came to me afterward, risking his life to tell me the truth, that white men dressed as Apache had killed my husband to drive me from our land, I believed him. I'm sorry, Victoria said softly. Mrs. Vasquez nodded. The land Manuel and I farmed sits above a vein of silver. 2 weeks after I was forced to sell it for a pittance, the Brennan mining company began operations. Her dark eyes met Victoria's. We each have our reasons to seek justice, Nina. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Lucy arrived with news. Judge Harrington had agreed to meet them. intrigued by the mention of William Hartwell's daughter and long-held suspicions about territorial corruption. "The Montgomerys are in an uproar," Lucy reported. "Judge Montgomery believes your story about visiting Mrs. Vasquez, but Thomas Brennan came calling this morning, asking pointed questions about your movements." "Did he suspect you of helping me?" Victoria asked worriedly. Lucy shook her head. "I played the simple, loyal servant, but he's having the house watched. I slipped out through the neighbor's garden." Dusk brought Nahkohe's return, accompanied by a nervous man introduced as Jenkins, the miner who had refused to participate in the staged raids. "They're planning something big this time," Jenkins said, his hands shaking slightly as Mrs. Vasquez poured him coffee. "Not just a few cattle stolen or a homestead burned. They're going to attack the settlement at Agua Fria, make it look like a full Apache war party. Women and children will die, and no one will question when the military moves against the Apache camps in retaliation." Victoria felt ill. "When?" "3 days from now, after they receive payment and final instructions tonight." Nahkohe's expression hardened. "That timing is no coincidence. The Tribal Council meets in 4 days to discuss the government's latest treaty offer. If our warriors are engaged in battle or mourning dead, there will be no unified response. And the Brennans get what they want: access to Apache lands with silver deposits," Victoria concluded. As night fell, they made final preparations. Judge Harrington would meet them near the warehouse with 2 trusted marshals. Jenkins would identify the mercenaries he had worked with previously. Victoria and Nahkohe would provide the documented evidence of the larger conspiracy. "Stay close to me," Nahkohe told Victoria as they prepared to leave. In the lamplight, his face looked carved from stone, but his eyes held concern. "If anything goes wrong, it won't," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "Justice is long overdue." The streets of Santa Fe were quiet as they made their way to the meeting point, moving through shadows, avoiding the occasional patrol. Judge Harrington, a tall, austere man with steel-grey hair and a bearing that commanded respect, was waiting with 2 grim-faced marshals. "Miss Hartwell." The judge studied her face. "You have your father's eyes, and it seems his courage." "You knew him well?" Victoria asked. "Well enough to know he was murdered for what he discovered." The judge's voice was heavy with old regret. "I couldn't prove it then. Perhaps tonight we rectify that failure." They took positions around the dilapidated warehouse. The judge and marshals concealed near the main entrance, Victoria and Nahkohe at a broken window where they could witness the transaction, Lucy and Jenkins hidden nearby with the documented evidence. The waiting stretched Victoria's nerves taut. When hoofbeats finally approached, she held her breath. Thomas entered first, followed by a man she recognized as Colonel Fitzgerald, and 3 rough-looking men whom Jenkins identified in whispers as Fletcher and his most trusted mercenaries. "Gentlemen," Thomas's voice carried clearly in the quiet building, "time is short. You understand your instructions?" Fletcher, a scarred man with cold eyes, nodded. "Make it bloody enough to justify full military response. Apache weapons left behind, bodies mutilated in their style." Colonel Fitzgerald shifted uncomfortably. "The territorial militia will respond within hours. By the time federal authorities investigate, the evidence will support our narrative." Thomas opened a strongbox. "Half now, half upon completion. Once the Apache are removed from the disputed territories, the mining operations can expand without interference." Victoria's stomach churned as she watched Thomas, the man she had been prepared to marry, calmly arranging mass murder for profit. Beside her, Nahkohe's body vibrated with tension, though his face remained impassive. "Where's the Apache war paint and weapons?" Fletcher asked. "My boys need to look authentic." "In the back room," Thomas replied, "along with maps of Agua Fria showing the most vulnerable approaches." It was enough. Judge Harrington gave the signal, and the marshals burst in, weapons drawn. "Federal marshals, everyone freeze!" Chaos erupted. Fletcher and his men reached for weapons but found themselves outgunned. Colonel Fitzgerald raised his hands immediately, his military training recognizing a lost position. Thomas, however, bolted toward a rear exit. "He's getting away," Victoria cried. Nahkohe was already moving, swift as a hunting cougar. Victoria followed instinctively, ignoring the judge's shout to stay back. They emerged into the alley behind the warehouse just as Thomas was mounting a horse. "Stop!" Victoria called. Thomas turned, his face contorting with rage when he saw her. "You treacherous bitch. My father was right. We should have silenced you years ago, just like your parents." The admission, so casually cruel, staggered Victoria. "You knew. All this time you knew they were murdered on your father's orders." "Politics requires decisive action," Thomas sneered, drawing a pistol from his coat. "A lesson you won't live to appreciate." He aimed at Victoria's heart. The shot rang out in the quiet night, but it was Thomas who jerked backward, blood blossoming on his shoulder. Nahkohe stood beside Victoria, his rifle smoking. "Not fatal," he said coolly. "He deserves to face justice, not martyrdom." The commotion brought the marshals running. As they secured Thomas, Judge Harrington approached Victoria, his face grave. "This is just the beginning," he warned. "Governor Brennan has powerful friends. This will be a difficult fight." "But a necessary one," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Dawn found them at the federal courthouse. Thomas and Fletcher were in custody, Colonel Fitzgerald was cooperating in exchange for leniency, and Judge Harrington was preparing warrants for Governor Brennan and his other conspirators. "We've sent riders to alert the settlement at Agua Fria and dispatched telegrams to Washington," the judge informed Victoria and Nahkohe. "But Brennan will fight this with every resource at his disposal." Victoria nodded tiredly. She had not slept, her testimony and her father's documents having been taken down through the night. "What happens now?" "You should leave Santa Fe," the judge advised. "At least until federal reinforcements arrive. Brennan still controls the territorial militia, and there are many who profit from his corruption." Victoria looked to Nahkohe, who had remained by her side throughout the night. "Where would I go?" A silent communication passed between them, possibility mingled with uncertainty. "My people would welcome William Hartwell's daughter," Nahkohe said quietly. "At least until it's safe for you to return." Before Victoria could respond, the courthouse doors burst open. Governor Brennan strode in, flanked by militia officers. His usual political charm had vanished, replaced by cold fury. "Judge Harrington," he thundered, "you've overstepped your authority. Release my son and Colonel Fitzgerald immediately. They're being held on federal charges of conspiracy, corruption, and incitement to murder," the judge replied calmly. "And now you can join them, Governor. Sergeant, arrest this man." The federal marshal moved forward, but the territorial militia officers stepped between them and the governor. "This is an illegal coup against the legitimate territorial government," Brennan declared. "These Apache sympathizers have fabricated evidence to undermine American expansion." His gaze fell on Victoria, and hatred flashed across his face. "Miss Hartwell has been corrupted by savage influences, perhaps even bewitched, considering her unnatural affinity for the Apache, who claims to have rescued her." Victoria stepped forward, rage giving her strength. "My father documented your crimes 10 years ago, Governor. You had him murdered to protect your schemes. Now justice will finally be served. Your father was a naive idealist who couldn't see that civilization advances through strength, not coddling savages," Brennan spat. "Everything I've done has been for the prosperity of this territory." "Prosperity built on blood," Nahkohe interjected, "on broken treaties and stolen land." Tension crackled in the courtroom as federal and territorial forces faced each other. Judge Harrington raised his hand for silence. "Governor, I have testimony from multiple witnesses, including your son and Colonel Fitzgerald. I have documented evidence of funds misappropriated and attacks orchestrated under your authority. Whether you surrender now or after telegrams reach Washington makes little difference to your eventual fate." Brennan's face twisted with calculation. For a moment, Victoria thought he might order his men to fight. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. "This isn't over," he said coldly. "Powerful interests in Washington understand what's at stake in these territories. They won't allow sentimentality over a few Indians to impede progress." As the federal marshals took him into custody, Victoria felt a weight lifting, the burden of deception and fear she had carried for 10 years. Yet uncertainty remained. Her place in Santa Fe society was destroyed. The Montgomerys would distance themselves from the scandal. Her planned future had evaporated. Outside the courthouse, morning sunlight bathed the plaza in gold. Citizens gathered in small groups whispering about the arrests. Victoria stood apart, suddenly adrift. "What will you do now?" Nahkohe asked, joining her. I don't know, she admitted. Everything I thought I knew about my life was built on lies. He studied her face. Not everything. Your courage, your sense of justice, those are true. Victoria turned to him, seeing not the Apache warrior or the educated man who moved between two worlds, but simply Nahkohe, the person who had twice saved her life and helped her reclaim her truth. You once led me to safety when I was lost, she said softly. Would you do so again? Something lightened in his expression. The path is not easy. My people face difficult times ahead, even with the Brennan schemes exposed. I'm stronger than I appear, Victoria replied. And I have much to learn about the truth of this land and its peoples. Judge Harrington approached before Nahkohe could respond. Miss Hartwell, I've arranged an escort to take you to Santa Cruz. You'll be safer there until the federal investigation concludes. Victoria straightened her shoulders. Thank you, Judge, but I've made other arrangements. The judge glanced between her and Nahkohe, understanding dawning in his weathered face. Your father was never one to choose the easy path either. He nodded respectfully to Nahkohe. Take care of her. The fight for justice in these territories is far from over. I know, Nahkohe replied, but it's a fight worth waging. As they prepared to depart, Lucy arrived with a small bundle of Victoria's belongings salvaged from the Montgomery house. I can't go back there, the maid said, anxiety clear in her voice. The judge says I'm a material witness now. Come with us, Victoria suggested impulsively, at least until it's safe. Lucy glanced uncertainly at Nahkohe, who nodded. My mother's people believe those who stand for truth are family, regardless of blood. By midday, they were riding north, away from Santa Fe and the life Victoria had known. The mountains rose before them, vast and uncompromising. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges she could barely imagine. Yet as she rode beside Nahkohe, Victoria felt something she had not experienced since childhood, the sense of moving towards something true rather than away from pain. Tell me about your people, she requested, as they made camp that evening. Not as the history books describe them, but as they truly are. As darkness fell, Nahkohe spoke of Apache ways, their deep connection to the land, their traditions of honor and respect, their struggle to maintain identity in a changing world. Victoria listened, recognizing that she was being offered not just knowledge but trust. It won't be easy, he said finally. You'll be viewed with suspicion by many. The path between our worlds is difficult to walk. Then we'll forge a new path, Victoria replied, her voice strengthening with conviction. My father died trying to bring justice to this territory. I can think of no better way to honor him than to continue that work. Nahkohe reached across the small fire between them, his hand finding hers. There's an Apache saying wisdom sits in places. It means that the land itself holds truth for those who learn to listen. Victoria interlaced her fingers with his, feeling the calluses that spoke of a life both harder and more honest than the one she had left behind. Then teach me to listen, she said softly. The desert night enfolded them, vast and filled with stars. Behind lay a world of deception exposed. Ahead, a future uncertain but facing it together. Victoria Hartwell, once destined to be a governor's daughter-in-law, had found a different destiny, one of her own choosing, beside a man who saw her true self. As Nahkohe's thumb traced circles on her palm, Victoria felt the last pieces of her former life fall away. Whatever trials awaited them, prejudice, political backlash, the ongoing struggle for justice in a land torn between worlds, they would face them side by side. Not as savior and saved, not as Apache and white, but as two people who had discovered that the strongest bonds are forged in the crucible of shared purpose and hard-won truth. The path ahead was uncharted, but for the first time since her parents' death, Victoria was truly free, to choose, to fight, and perhaps, in time, to love. As a storyteller, I've always believed that the most powerful narratives are those that challenge us to look beyond our preconceptions. She Was to Marry a Governor's Son is more than just a romance set against the backdrop of the American West. It's an exploration of the courage it takes to question the world as we've been taught to see it. In crafting Victoria and Nahkohe's journey, I wanted to illuminate a chapter of American history often sanitized in traditional narratives. The complex relationships between settlers, indigenous peoples, and the powerful interests that shaped the West were rarely black and white. Within these gray areas, Individual acts of moral courage could and did change lives. Victoria's transformation from a society woman destined for a respectable life to someone who chooses a path of greater purpose speaks to the universal human desire for authenticity. Nahkohe's willingness to trust someone from the world that had caused his people so much suffering reflects the hope that understanding can transcend even the deepest divides. Their story reminds us that America was built not just by those whose names fill history books, but by countless individuals who made difficult choices when faced with injustice. Some chose comfort and conformity, others risked everything for what they believed was right. My hope is that readers will see themselves in both Victoria and Nahkohe, in their doubts, their courage, and ultimately in their choice to forge a path where none existed before. In today's divided world, perhaps there's wisdom in remembering that our shared humanity has always been stronger than the barriers we create. The American West wasn't just a place of conquest and conflict. It was a crucible where different worlds collided, and sometimes, against all odds, found ways to create something new together. That legacy of resilience, adaptation, and unlikely alliances is as much a part of our national DNA as any other story we tell about ourselves. Thank you for allowing me to share this journey with you. May we all find the courage to question the paths laid out for us and the wisdom to build bridges where others see only walls. With gratitude, Wild West whispers. If you felt touched by Victoria and Nahkohe's journey, we kindly invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Your support truly helps us stay inspired to keep bringing you heartfelt stories full of love, redemption, and powerful twists. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being part of our storytelling family. At the end of this video, you'll see another suggestion from our channel. Click it and get swept away by another emotional journey you won't forget.